Hello, reader. I am Alix.
I'm Kelly.
And this is the LitJoy Podcast. This episode is brought to you by the next installment in our Fablehaven series.
Ooh.
So LitJoy is releasing each of the Fablehaven books with new covers, beautiful end pages, and we're working with Brandon on this.
Yeah.
And it has turned into such a fun middle grade project. So the next one in the series is called Rise of the Evening Star.
Brandon Mull, the author, has also included an author letter for our set specifically. There are brand new beautiful end pages. They're going to have gold gilded edges. It's just a beautiful collector's edition to add to your bookshelves and to read. Like to read with your kids, to read to yourself, like just to add to your collection. I just love these because they have such a, it's like such a statement.
And these go in the shop May 22nd to Lunicorns and May 23rd to the public. So make sure to either find out what a Lunicorn is and become one. You can find that under membership on our website. Or you can, if it's May 23rd and it's open to the public, you can head to litjoycrate.com/Fablehaven, Fablehaven. Awesome. Thank you for listening to these promos, folks. On today's episode, we are doing our top 10 most recommended self-help books. So we did nonfiction, non-self-help.
That's right.
Now we're doing nonfiction self-help.
Sorry, when you say it like that, I'm all, yeah, it's fine.
What?
It's going to be great.
It's all good.
It's all good. Yeah. This is our self-help specific books because nonfiction, there's so many that fall in that category. And we wanted to really diversify by 2 separate episodes.
Oh, which could turn into 4. Nobody knows.
That's actually true. I'm all separate episodes. I'll leave it at that. This very specific genre of self-help.
Correct. And this is our top 10, but there is a chance that this will expand. I will say Kelly and I do a pretty good job of just reading a variety of genres because I think that that's kind of how we function. We'll get curious about something in the real world and then we'll want to escape into a fantasy and kind of just a little bit of all.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden we need like a cowboy romance. Like who knows?
You never know.
It's just what
Howdy.
I'm in the mood for.
It's all about mood. And sometimes you're in the mood for Enneagram. That was a transition.
That was a segue. All right.
Number 1, Kel, jump right in.
So this one came into our orbit about 2 years ago, and it's called The Road Back to You, an Enneagram Journey to Self-Discovery, and it's by Ian Morgan Cron. There are other books, to be clear, around this topic, but this seems to be the one that has gained the most traction, and I really enjoyed it as well. Before we dive completely into like what it is, I will just also say that there is some like religious Christianity themes mixed in with it.
Oh, I forgot about that.
But it is kind of subtle, but it will pop up here and there. It didn't bother me, but I know that I like to just say that up front. Yeah. Some people, not their thing.
Okay, so it's essentially a personality kind of
so we can jump in.
Algorithm type book. And I love personality tests, and I know Kelly does too. Mostly just because I think we're always interested in human behavior. We're psychology majors. And so this is a really fun type of self-help book that we enjoy is figuring out what makes people tick. And I would say the kind of Christian undertone just really was a bit lost on me. I just didn't notice it. I was so focused on that felt a lot more like the author's interpretation of a system that exists outside of religion. Like Enneagram is not a religious kind of personality test.
Nope.
But that's a good note. So let's explain a little bit, maybe, Kelly, what the Enneagram is.
So I'm going to jump down a little bit in the summary, but it just says that the Enneagram is basically an ancient personality typing system with an uncanny accuracy in describing how human beings are wired, both positively and negatively. So when I first jumped into this, the background that I had was what's now called like the people code or the color code, which is like 4 colors, and I'm like, you a red or a blue or a yellow or a white. This one breaks it down by 9 different numbers. So 1 through 9. And then from there, it can break down into 3 subcategories within those numbers. They're called triads. And there is one called the heart triad, the head triad, if I remember right, and is it the gut? Those are like the three.
Yeah.
Kind of depending on which one motivates you. Like, is it more heart and emotions, more head and logic, like, and like gut intuition? Like those are kind of the three different triads. And then from there, you might hear something called a wing.
Yeah.
And I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I'm just going to say them all up front. So let's say you take the test, which is, there are online tests, but if you read the book, which I recommend, the book is like, it tells you like, there's no test here. Read the book, which is the one you relate to the most, the one that you're just like nodding your head along to, and you're just like, yes, this is me. Like you've diagnosed yourself.
Also in there's the questions at the beginning of each chapter for each number, and there's 9 numbers total. So 9 personality, I would say, motivator types.
Or like almost like little bullet points.
Yes. So you can kind of go through and do yes, no's on those. But also what I found was when I was reading it, in some chapters when they talk about an unhealthy and a healthy version of every number.
Yeah.
And when you're reading the unhealthy version, if you start to feel activated,
called
out, that probably means that you have some of that number as part of your personality. So I am an 8 wing 7, and I have a lot of 2 in me.
Yeah.
And I know Kelly and I relate on that.
Yeah.
And so in the ways that I felt called out or the ways that I felt heard and understood, it was in those numbers primarily.
Yeah.
And Kelly, do you want to talk about yours a little bit?
Yeah. And so when Alix mentioned she's a 8 wing 7, the wing meaning what's on either side of that number.
Yes.
So at your core, in a sense, possibly, you probably could vacillate between the two pretty evenly, but let's say you were more dominantly an 8. Your wing, meaning the side number 7 is the one you relate to as well.
Yeah, it's like where you go, you can also take on a lot of characteristics from that number. So I could either wing a 9 or a 7.
Yes.
And then Kelly, you are a 5.
So I've done this so many different ways, and it's interesting because I don't fit super cleanly into one, which is fine.
Yeah.
So when I took the test, I related very evenly between 3 different ones, but I kind of fall into the 5 category with very close second between a number 2 and a 9. And it's interesting because I have one from each triad basically. So just weirdly, I don't know, balanced or lying to myself. It's one of the two.
Could be either one.
But then like my husband, I was like, oh, he's an 8, like, or my kid is like, oh, you're not supposed to officially like have younger children, in a sense, take the test because they're still budding, their personalities are coming out, but you can kind of see themes.
You can kind of see themes. Yeah. Both of us have a 6.
Yes.
In our family, which, so we can kind of talk about some of the characteristics of these, but just diving into the book, you'll find so much more. You'll get so excited about yourself and what your number is and all the people around you. But for example, we both have little 6s in our family, which means that they're the loyalist and they are going to prepare for all scenarios.
Yeah.
Best and worst case scenarios. And so ways that we've used the Enneagram to, I think, better parent and show up for those children is to tell them the full plan. Like, we're going to wake up, we're going to go do this, then we're going to do this. This is here. The doors are locked. I have to tell my son, like, the house is locked up. Just creating safety so that they don't have to go down all those worst case scenario paths. And so that's a way that this book can be really helpful and impactful.
Absolutely. We just totally resonated with it when we first read it, I think. And once you see yourself in it, of course, it's going to be super engaging because you're just like, it feels like almost like a fortune telling moment a little bit. At the same time, you're like, I know these things about me, but I didn't want them written out on paper.
You're like,
but it's so good because it kind of explains everybody's core motivation, why they're kind of doing what they're doing, along with their fears attached with it.
Yeah.
And when you know that about the people in your life, especially in your family, the people you care about, it is so helpful. At least for me, I found it so helpful to give me a little bit of a guideline.
Yeah.
In parenting. In my relationship with my spouse, obviously why I'm doing what I'm doing. And it really helped me be like, okay, I don't want to do that thing that I know I do with this number that's kind of like on the negative side. Because once you read it, you can't unread it. And you realize like, oh, I do that. It's just never been pointed out. And so the book is just so eye-opening in a way that I use every day now.
Yeah.
Right?
For sure.
You just kind of have to memorize the numbers, and reading the book kind of really gives you a good taste for those.
Yeah. And also we know what all of our employees are.
Yeah.
We read it as a team at LitJoy.
We did.
And so what's really helpful is I now understand incentive more or motivation more. So if we're in a meeting and one employee says a statement and another employee says the same statement, I know that because of their Enneagram, they're coming from different motivations.
Mm-hmm.
One might say that because they want control or they're feeling out of control. One might say something because they want to make sure that we've covered all of our bases. One might say something because they're just genuinely curious.
Yeah.
And they want information, and the information makes them feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing their number
Mm-hmm.
helps you to be a better leader. And so I would highly recommend for anyone who has people in their life.
Yeah.
Really. So,
and even if you don't.
and even if you're alone,
it'll help.
It'll help you to know you better.
Yeah.
Road back to you.
So,
also, I will say that Ian Morgan Cron, the author, this is just my pet peeve of the book, is that he's a 4, and the 4 is the dreamer. A lot of actors are dreamers. I have
musicians. Yeah.
Yes, we have lots of 4 energy in our lives
Mm-hmm.
and our families. And he talks about how he talks about how the 4s are just, they'll be crushed if they hear something bad about themselves.
Yeah.
And so he goes really light on the 4 in
the negative
side and then still is apologetic. And I'm just I'm sorry, but imagine being an 8 reading this book. He fucking goes right into it. And I'm and you start the book with an 8. I just never felt so heard and understood in a book than when it described the little girl in kindergarten who was I have an appointment with the principal. And then she sits down with the principal, is I don't need to do this activity. And I'm I literally did that as a little kid. So I was I think I'm an 8.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know. So anyways, I was just Ian, if you're out there, you're a 4, but you're not that special. We're all special.
I don't know. It was really helpful for me to realize my brother's a 4.
Yeah.
And I had never really been able to pinpoint him. And so I was just because I didn't fully understand him ever.
Yeah.
Because we're very, very different. And so being able to read that, it was kind of a nice gift just to be I get it a little bit better now.
Yeah. Where he's at and what
he's coming from.
And where your 4s can bring more whimsy or more just magic to a scenario, but there's sensitive souls.
I forgot the last thing I'll mention about this book.
Okay.
I mean, and there's so many factors, so I don't want it to overwhelm anybody. But the other cool thing is it talks about what happens with each number when they're under stress or when they feel really secure, because they actually will almost jump across. It's almost like a circle with the numbers. And it's they can jump across the Enneagram circle to completely different numbers when they're under stress or when they're feeling secure. And it is very accurate as well. And that's another way to help determine, is this my number?
Mm-hmm.
If you're feeling you're not quite sure where you fall. But again, highly recommend.
Yeah, recommend it. And I will say having a variety of every number in your life is just so helpful. At LitJoy, we have every single number, and it makes for a much richer tapestry of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have no number that's my favorite, though I tend to gravitate towards 5. I really do.
Yeah.
And both you and Tyler have a little bit of that 5, wing 4, wing 6. So both Kelly and my husband are 5. So clearly I said I have no favorite number, but I might.
5s are the reader, nerd, dive deep and rabbit hole into subjects. And I'm just yeah.
I love it so much.
It's great.
Okay, we have to move on because we'll spend the whole episode talking about this.
We could do an entire episode on Enneagram.
I really could.
Easy, but we won't.
So we may have talked about this book before, The 4 Agreements by Miguel Ruiz. It's Don Miguel Ruiz. And this book was one of those books where it was a total mental paradigm shift for me. It changed in really impactful ways the ways that I view myself and humans around me. And I can't think of a more succinct way if you adopt these practices to exercise self-awareness.
Okay.
And self-improvement, if you really buy into them. So this one is definitely probably the most impactful for how I move through the world. So there are 4 agreements. There is be impeccable with your word. Don't take anything personally. don't make assumptions, and always do your best. And I'll just give a quick rundown of each. Be impeccable in your word. This is really a call out, and it is so difficult in practice if you as a human, but it is a call out for speak the truth and do not tell stories. Don't tell stories about yourself. Don't tell stories about other people. Get really clear and clean in your communication. So in conflict, instead of bringing to the conflict all of these other stories, instead having a conversation that is about clearing up expectations, reality. It's just when you start to live this principle to be impeccable in your word really authentically, you notice that a lot of fear around communication with others just melts away. Yeah. Because the goal is to be clean, impeccable in how you communicate. And that is having the courage to admit your emotions, to admit your faults, to admit your stories, and to take ownership of them, but also to have compassion for them and to move through them. Yeah. So it's so good.
I was like, all of us, I'm sure, all of us have stories because everything's going to get filtered through our own life experiences and perceptions. Yes. And that is where I feel like the majority of miscommunication lives. And expectations, right? And so just bringing attention to that even on its own, it's got to be life-changing because I find that that's always where the rub is with me and, my kid or a spouse or a friend. It's just like, oh, no, that wasn't what was going on at all. Yeah. But it fit the story that person needed to tell because it makes sense to them.
Right. Because we feel the need to make sense of other people, but we also want to justify our emotions.
Absolutely.
A habit that humans have is we like to outsource our emotions to others that, that person made me feel this way. So getting impeccable in your word is recognizing that actually nobody made me anything, but their actions did affect me. And I want to get really clear about why.
Yeah. Get curious around the why.
Yeah. Which is interesting. That kind of leads into the second of the 4 agreements is don't take anything personally. And this one just hit me so hard. I've shared this with a few people and they're like, I don't believe that. Like there's people who just refuse to believe to not take things personally. And I think it's because it's a bit of an identity crisis. So he shares in the book that nothing is personal. Like the behaviors of everyone around you, it's really all about them.
Yeah.
And he even gave the example of like murder. And he's like, even if someone were to take your life, that is still about them, their experiences, their stories, their trauma, their warped perception. Like they're going to act in such a way that it's all about them. And I thought that was so interesting. It really it is so empowering that it terrifies people to not take things personally because it is ultimate power. To just realize that it's
not about you all the time. Or it's like, we obviously are always constantly thinking about us and ourselves in so many ways that we just assume if we take it personally, it's probably because you're thinking about it from your perception. And the other person, I'm like, think about it from the other person's side of it, who's probably like, not that big of a deal for me. Or you are not like on my mind that much.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Or just like, I'm like, even if someone's rude to me, because let's say someone doesn't like me and they're rude, it's like, but that still is their story and their thing that they're working through. So that one was the second agreement. I thought it was like life-changing for me. And then don't make assumptions. That's the same as the stories.
Yeah.
The stories we tell ourselves, the assumptions we make, and then always do your best is the final one.
And tell us a little bit about that. Is it just like in general across the board? Like
no, so always do your best. It is across the board, but it's just it's deeply rooted in generosity to self. Okay. So it's like always do your best doesn't mean that you have a definite definition of my best. It's in each moment, am I doing my best? So I did, given that I had the flu today, I did my best for having the flu today. Given that I'm a little tired or that, my morning had a wrench thrown in it,
Yeah.
I still showed up and did my best for what I had to offer.
Gotcha.
So it's basically just like an accountability and generosity to self.
A little more grace for yourself.
And to know that you are doing your best. And if you choose to not do your best that day, that's also the accountability piece. And so if you lose it on your kids, you're like, you know what? I was exhausted. I asked them 8 times. Like, that was the best I had today.
Mm-hmm.
So there is like that balance with that agreement.
I love this.
Yeah.
I know I was looking into it, and now there's a 5th agreement, which I'm curious. I'm like, I wonder what he added, because I haven't read it yet.
I don't know.
So I'm like,
You had enough people write in a letter that was like, this one should be in there.
there's one more. So I need to pull that up, because I think it's, slightly newer, but.
Yeah. I will say for me, the impeccable with your word and don't take anything personally just happened to impact me more.
Yeah.
But as you read it, you'll know which one kind of hits.
I'm going to read this one sentence from the summary, because I think it kind of puts it all in perspective of everything we've said, which is the 4 agreements, basically all those agreements come together, and it's a source of self-limiting beliefs that rob us of joy and create needless suffering. And so this is based on some ancient Toltec wisdom, and it's like a code of conduct. And so that's how he came together to write this book and get rid of those self-limiting beliefs. Get out of here.
Yeah. I love it. Love it. Okay.
Okay, number 3.
Up next.
Okay, this one it's like so close on my to-read list, like almost there. I've had it recommended so many times. So
okay,
go ahead and tell me
talking
about
about this one. Okay, The Untethered Soul: The Journey Beyond Yourself by Michael A. Singer. This book is wild. You have to read it twice, I feel like, at least. So I finished it once, and it's on my list to read again. It kind of takes the same thoughts as the 4 agreements, and expands upon them. So the kind of question it asks is, what would it be, or what would it feel like to free yourself from limitations and soar beyond your boundaries? What can you do each day to discover inner peace and serenity? And it's an answer to those questions. And it follows a lot of the same themes as 4 agreements. Essentially, he walks through a lot of the perceptions of self we have, like how we construct what it means to be us, and how a lot of that is just that. It's a construct. And so a lot of what we do creates these false expectations of what life is, like, what does happiness mean, and when will I be happy, and
what it should be.
Yeah, we create all these kind of rules around it, and we also can get really imbalanced in just our daily stories we tell ourselves. And so The Untethered Soul, it's talking about not being tethered to any of these constructs, and instead really finding a way to live in the moment. And to live in, like, free from construct. So it's really beautiful.
Sounds like it's really challenging, like, your current beliefs. And I mean, like, your beliefs and constructs and or just programming and conditioning.
Yes. Programming and conditioning. And then also, like, identifying with your trauma, identifying with your emotions. So there is, like, this element of moving through things. For example, you might have had an abusive childhood. And it's really great at kind of talking about tools to move through that. Now, I do think that I do a lot of, like, therapy work and energy work, and like, I work on a lot of my trauma. So this book feels like a great companion to that, and, like, leveling up in how you intellectually view your trauma. But I would also recommend, like, don't just use this as therapy, right?
Yeah.
So it's more of like a thought-provoking book. And that would be my recommendation personally. But it is like, I don't need to identify so hard with my emotions. Like, I might be feeling anger or grief, but that doesn't need to be my value as a person. Like, I am of value independent of emotions or experience. Like, I came down or came into life having all of the value that is necessary to be someone who is worthy of love and experience and joy. and nothing about my experiences in life or the emotions I feel or the things I do is going to take away that intrinsic value. And so that's kind of what the book is about, and about breaking down these barriers we put in our own way to happiness.
Do you feel like this one is like you'd recommend it to anyone, or is this one you feel like a little bit more specific?
I actually feel like I would probably recommend it to people who are already curious about self-awareness.
Okay.
And people who are curious about, I think probably, I wouldn't even say spiritualism. I would say I would recommend it to someone who is open to the idea of reflecting on the meaning and purpose of life. Yeah. So there's some self-help books that I'm like, this is great for a business owner. This one I feel like is for someone who wants to be introspective.
Yeah. Just open to understanding the bigger picture.
Yes. So as someone who is curious about like why they are in existence, which I think there are some people who don't want to go there. And so I don't know if I'd always recommend it. I would say kind of the gateway book would be the Four Agreements to get you to this. Like I would recommend that one first.
Stepping stone. That's perfect.
Okay. Next up on the list, Kelly, this is you.
Number 4, big shock. We say it almost every episode, I swear, is Come As You Are, the surprising new science that will transform your sex life. And Burnout is the second book. So sorry. Burnout, the secret to unlocking the stress cycle. So I put both these books on here, and they're by Emily Nagoski, because both have been so transformative for us. They're incredibly thoughtful books and important books. One more about just like, when we talk about your sex life, it is not necessarily about the act of sex. It is kind of everything surrounding that.
Yeah.
And a lot of propaganda around it, as well as helping women feel seen, and also helping women, at least in my reading of it, feel whole and complete and just fine as I am, because there's so much that has played into my sexuality growing up with social media and church and my family, just all the things that influence it. And so I love what Emily does in this book, in Come As You Are, because she kind of strips it all away. And she's like, let's just talk about what's actually happening. You know, like, let's talk about the biology first. And then we're going to talk through all the propaganda shit and why it's got to go.
Yep.
And let's talk about what's really going on.
Yeah.
That's like the quickest summary I can give, but we talk a lot about it. So.
And my favorite part about Come As You Are specifically is, in similar ways that Brene Brown does it, she gives you vocabulary.
Yes.
So like Brene Brown will give you vocabulary around vulnerability and work and leadership. I feel like Emily gives you vocabulary around the mental, chemical, physical mechanisms that go into your sex and sexuality. So like, you know, like brakes and gas and what do those mean, and like context and yuck and yum and like all these things that just give you tools to better understand yourself and to communicate with your partner.
Yes, it was so helpful, and both me and my husband read it and had some fantastic discussions around it. So while I know it's geared towards women, I find that men also get so much value in learning about it, you know, from the women's perception and on their point of view. Because ultimately that's what you need to come together to really have, I would say, like a great sex life.
Yeah.
As well as like how you feel about yourself in that regard.
Yeah.
So highly recommend, because we talk about it all the time. And then the other book, The Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. It's another great one that just really helps understand like why women experience burnout very differently than men, right? And it gives you some plans to help minimize stress, manage your emotions, and live more happily, full, joyful life.
Yeah. And it is interesting. It talks just kind of about the physical and chemical differences, that it takes women longer to like de-stress. And we are, like a 9-to-5 work week and 5 days a week. And there's so many systems and structures in society that are distinctly to the advantage of men.
I was like, just say it.
Yeah. They make more sense with men's life and physiology. They make sense that men have an unencumbered labor, that they're unencumbered labor, meaning the female partner's at home doing all the home things. So there's just so many structures that are antiquated at this point in time that I think that there is more balance coming in, at least in American culture, into like a more balanced work week. I mean, I think like that's definitely what we promote at LitJoy is, anybody who needs to go to a family thing, always.
Yeah.
And so it's just the burnout one is really good at kind of giving reasons why it's okay to do things differently and what really makes the most sense for women in their lives.
I was just a few of the talking points I thought were interesting. You mentioned this, but it says women's brains take twice as long as men's to shift into a state of helplessness when under stress. Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
So I was just like, that's interesting. Sorry, it was slightly different than what you mentioned, but
yeah.
And did you remember that at all when you read it?
A state of helplessness?
Yes. Like men will shift there faster than women.
They're like, I can't do it.
Yeah, for real. And so I was like, what? We've got like just it seems like stronger like mental fortitude or something.
I think that if you're thinking about it from an evolutionary perspective, just the female animal in the majority of species has to just kind of make sure they are extra cautious because they're taking care of the babies for at least the first period for a lot of animals. So I wonder if that's like an evolutionary thing where it's like, I need to be able to handle high stress for longer, not only for my survival, but my little
prodigy here.
my little babies. So that's interesting. I don't know. I love books like this though that just call out things that
And again, I think you said it gives it verbiage and language and just like acknowledging that, right here it says takes 20 to 60 minutes of physical activity a day, and that will help complete the stress response cycle. It's like, just even that one tidbit is so empowering for someone who may deal with stress constantly, always feeling like anxious. Like if I got out and did something physical, it will complete that cycle instead of feeling stuck and like back and forthing in your body.
Yeah.
That like buzzy feeling.
Yeah.
And I know they are always like, get out and exercise, but even just taking a quick walk or, just meditating outside or something, go hug the trees. It's good for you. They're a little prickly, but they're great.
I'm like, I love exercise. So I'm like, you convinced me.
Okay. Should we move on?
Yep. So the next on our list is
number 5.
Why We Sleep.
Yeah.
Unlocking the Power of Sleep and Dreams. I don't need to go into this a ton. Matthew Walker wrote this book. I actually just saw him on Huberman and he had like long hair and a headband. And it was like immediately went to the comment section, when you like
you just
immediately and everyone's like, all I heard was headband. And I was like, look, he was a whole aesthetic. It's fine. He's doing a thing. But Matthew Walker is a leading neuroscientist. I think he might be at Stanford. I'm not positive. He's British, but I think his research lab might be at Stanford. And he's kind of like the leading neuroscientist in sleep. Wow. So there might be other scientists who are like, have more to say on this, but he just kind of has broken through into mainstream culture. And fascinating study about he's done many studies linking sleep to all these other things, to linking sleep to healthy outcome and disease and unhealthy outcome. And basically the highlights are you need 7 hours of sleep every night. That is the most important thing to take away from the book, at least 7. Anything less than 7, and you will start to see either short-term or long-term negative effects. So long-term could be like higher susceptibility to Alzheimer's, earlier death, or higher susceptibility to disease in general. Short-term would be like irritability, weight gain, those kind of things. So it's just sleep is fundamental. And one thing that's so interesting about this book is he's like, we always talk about the world as if we are meant to be awake. And he's like, actually, we are a very interesting species that sleeps a lot. And we tend to think that our sleep is just like irrelevant. But he's like, it could be that the sleep world, the dream world is actually the natural state of our bodies, and that being awake is a different experience. So he kind of
flips it.
He has a bit of a paradigm shift in the book, and I think it's just for us to pay attention. But it's really interesting.
Wake up.
It's interesting though, because it's like, what is the natural state of a human body? And sleep tends to be one of the absolute most critical. You can't survive without sleep, but you can survive without being awake. If you think about like someone in a coma. So it's really, you you would die if you didn't sleep.
I think I have pushed off reading this one because I struggle. I literally struggle with sleep. And I know it's just going to make me feel bad that I can't sleep, but it's like biologically a problem for my entire family. And so I am curious though, if I read this, does it give me tools?
Yeah.
Even if I no matter what I try to do, struggle?
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So it gives you tools. He gives you a bunch of tools. Presents all the research in a way that's very, very fun. I think actually the reader on this might be Steve West.
Oh,
yeah.
Sold.
I think it is Steve West, which we have a massive crush on Steve West. If we ever get to interview him, we're like, just talk to us the whole episode.
Just tell us everything.
So Steve West is an audiobook reader. I think it's him who reads it. I'm pretty sure. And there are tips and tricks in there. Awesome. And also, if you're like, man, I really want to dig into the sleep thing, Huberman is great because he interviews Matthew Walker and he just goes into way more detail.
Okay.
So Huberman is another neuroscientist.
He also has a podcast.
The Huberman Lab at the same university, I think. So I don't know. They have some crossover there. Okay, next.
Number 6 on our list is Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art by James Nestor. So we just read this one maybe like 3 or 4 months ago in our book club. We mentioned that sometimes. And it's all about your breathing. The biggest takeaway from this one that I got was like, if nothing else, like do everything in your power to not be a mouth breather.
It's true.
To breathe through your nose they've proven it in 100 different ways, it seemed like in the book, that it's going to improve your life, the length of your life, the quality of your life, everything, if you can breathe more through your nose on the daily, especially while you sleep.
Yes. So we actually had several people in book club who immediately went home and bought tape. There's just a really sensitive tape.
Like a mouth tape?
Yeah, it's almost like the tape you'd use of like applying gauze to like a wound, but they taped their mouth and snoring went away.
Yeah.
Sleep apnea went away. Like they were wildly surprised at the positive effects of just nose breathing at night.
My husband read this book with me and did the exact same thing. He bought the tape immediately and he would just like put it on his lips and it looks like a little X. And it keeps him from falling into that, just real deep state where that's when he would start to mouth breathe and snore. And it was so crazy because just that little piece of tape helped keep him closed. And I have not woken up from his snoring. He's getting better sleep. And I think it's actually retraining him to just breathe through his nose naturally.
Yeah. And what I find interesting is how much this one kind of goes with the sleep one we just talked about.
Yes.
Why we sleep. Breathing is just such an important part of sleep. So the book talks a lot about that. It also talks about how we are chronic. Humans have become, according to scientists, chronic shallow breathers.
Yes.
And it talks about the significance of deep breathing, filling your lungs up and full exhalation and breathing slower. So we breathe fast and shallow and it actually kind of just ages you much quicker.
And it even says right here, the ideal breathing rate is 5.5 breaths per minute. And when I really thought about that, I was like, I started like
hyperventilating.
Just in general, breathing that slow seemed a little impossible. But collectively as a book club, what we did is we sat down and practiced different types of breathing and different lengths of breath. And it was really fascinating to push yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
And you can absolutely, within a few minutes, start to bring your breathing down.
Yeah, and to slow your heart rate, to slow your inhale, exhale. I have personally from this book started implementing breathing through my nose when working out. It is very hard.
I was going to say, that's hard.
It's tricky. I don't do it like if I'm at a higher
because they recommend that, right?
Yeah, they recommend breathing through your nose. Just talking about like the incredible just physical feats that athletes have accomplished in breathing through their nose. So you'll notice that there's more athletes who breathe through their nose when they're like professional athletes and Olympians who are breathing through their nose because the thought was that they weren't getting enough oxygen if it was through their nose. It's kind of an outdated thought. It actually improves lung capacity and makes it possible to keep your heart rate down while enduring longer. Yeah. So especially if you're an athlete. So if you're trying to get your heart rate up to burn calories, it's maybe not something you're thinking about. You want your heart rate to be high. But if you're an athlete, then then using your breath can extend that endurance and stamina. One thing that was also interesting is there's a guy in here who's just like a breathwork guru who they talk about in the book. And the guy like hiked like Everest barefoot or something stupid, right? Like it was just like, he goes to extremes, but essentially there's this man they were talking about. I think he's Norwegian, and he's pretty famous in breathwork circles, but there's also like monks and things like that who can essentially through breathwork slow down their heart rate to a point where it looks like they're dead.
Yeah.
And like hold it there and then come back. And I'm like, what?
It's like this extremely meditative state.
Yes. Like it's nuts. Or like the power of breathwork to like heat their bodies. They could sit in frozen, ice cold snow for like hours, but there's like a melted ring around them because they're using breathwork to move energy to heat their body. So like humans are electric. We have energy currents running through us and you can like just measure this. But using breathwork, you can like increase the energy flow, which is why people do it therapeutically. And so every morning I do breathwork exercises, just little ones. And I've yet to like feel compelled to hike barefoot.
Yeah.
But I think that there is more to breathing than just extending your life, but also improving quality.
Yeah. I don't want to go, we could talk a lot about this book too, because it was so fascinating. Yes. But what I thought was really interesting is he really dives into many different topics of how breathing can affect that topic. You know, like you talk about the Olympians or meditation, and he really dives into like the medical field, even discussing how they've done these different studies and it has healed people from several different things. And so by the end of the book, you're almost convinced like, well, my breathing can literally change everything. Like it's this miracle thing that can do all the things. But we also kind of like discussed as a group how, you know, just because he said it doesn't mean it's like fact, you know, because it really is convincing by the end. Clearly there's benefits, 100%.
Yes.
But it's kind of like also take it with a little bit of a grain of salt because by the end of the book, I literally was like, so I don't need to see a doctor ever again. If I just breathe through my nose correctly, slowest pace, I'll be great.
I love it.
A little bit, right? So
a little bit, for real. Like, honestly. Awesome. Well, our list is longer than what we have shared, obviously. Shocker. So this will be a 2-part. We'll go ahead and film another episode to talk more about other self-help books that we've really loved and that have had an impact on
And I'm looking
lives.
at some of the ones on the list. I'm like, yep, I'm going to want to talk about that one for a little longer. So
yeah, they're good ones.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for listening to the LitJoy Podcast. Please remember to rate and review us.
And like a good book, recommend us to your friends.